Good evening, everyone. My name is Lee Shoemaker, and I'm the City of Eugene staff representative for the meeting. Before the chairs convene the meeting, I have a few reminders and introductory words. First, here is the agenda for the evening. The purpose of the Active Transportation Committee is to advise city staff and community organizations and partners on implementation of Eugene's pedestrian bicycle strategic plan to represent community and constituent interests in transportation planning decisions and to provide feedback to staff on projects relating to walking and biking. Eugene City staff will consider recommendations from the Active Transportation Committee along with input from other members of the public during decision-making processes. Please keep in mind that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube. All verbal and written commentary will be held in the public record. Tonight's meeting will begin with a 10-minute public comment period. The public comment period is an opportunity for individuals to speak to the committee on transportation-related issues. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak. To indicate you would like to speak, please use the raise hand feature within Zoom now. The chair will call on you when it is your turn, and staff will unmute your microphone at that time. When it is your time to speak, please give your name, city of residence, and for Eugene residents, your ward or neighborhood. At any time during the meeting, you are welcome to ask a question using the Q&A function or use the chat feature for discussion with other attendees and committee members. Comments will also be monitored and recorded. Anyone making inappropriate comments will be restricted from the live portion of the meeting. Questions will be answered at the chair's discretion. As a reminder, civil speech supports everyone feeling comfortable sharing their perspectives and opinions. Let's give one another the respect and courteous and civil speech tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to the chair.
Thank you, Lee. So at this point, we're going to have some time for any public comment. Looks like we have 3 attendees. Please raise your hand if you would like to say something. We have 1 phone call in listener, and I'm going to assume that we don't have a way for that person to give public comment. Is that correct?
I can, I'm actually not certain. I think we can just allow that person to speak same as others.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing nothing, let's move to the next item. Approve the May meeting notes. If everyone has had a chance to view the meeting notes that Lee sent out, we could hear a motion.
I'll move to approve the meeting notes.
I'll second.
All in favor, put your thumbs up. All opposed, put your thumbs down. Okay. Notes approved. Number 4, we're hearing from Karen Mason tonight about Franklin Boulevard. Karen?
Excuse me, Daniel, can I just say, I really appreciate the minutes. There are a lot of typos in them that sometimes make them confusing to read. And I don't really want staff to spend the time, perfecting the minutes. But I don't know if it's legal, I'd be glad to review them and proofread them and kind of correct some of the typos so they're a little easier to read if that's allowed. So it's just a thought.
Lee is muted.
Yeah,
you can always send me your comments and I can adjust it before the meeting. Or if you want to send them to me, if they're minor typos, I can fix them. Or we can approve it at the next meeting, whatever you want to do.
It's not a big thing. It's just that sometimes there are enough, sentence fragments and discontinuous thoughts that it's a little bit hard to understand what's going on. But As I say, I don't really want staff to spend their time perfecting the minutes. You've got more important things to do. But if it's, yeah, I'm fine with it the way they are.
Great. All right, so yeah, grant for Franklin Boulevard.
Just give me one moment, please, to set up a screen share. All right. So yeah, basically, for those of you who are at home, my name is Karen Mason, and I'm a transportation planner with the City of Eugene. And I'm here this evening because we are applying for funding through the Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity federal grant opportunity. If awarded, the funding will be used to construct some of the features planned in the Franklin Boulevard Transformation Project, which planning for which began in early 2019, which, while not too long ago, isn't exactly the most recent either. So I wanted to give you a high-level overview of some of the project's history and also introduce the RAISE grant opportunity. So I believe most of you are probably familiar with Franklin Boulevard. It's a state highway that was built at a time when the main function of our streets was to move vehicles to key destinations. This project, it wants to basically, we are redesigning Franklin so that it becomes a safe, comfortable street with high quality, continuous connected facilities for people walking, biking, using an assisted mobility device, or using transit, while also still being able to accommodate people who are driving. Additionally, we want to make it a place to travel to and not just through by supporting changes in the form and use of building developments. Land use, the way that our buildings look and the purposes that they serve, is directly interconnected with transportation. The way one is designed directly affects the other, and look and feel of Franklin is already changing, but the street itself is not keeping up. So this project aims to redesign the street so that it doesn't just meet the needs of current development, but future development and community needs as well. The public involvement process for the project included 3 public events to collect community input to help inform the ultimate design, which that preferred design was publicly presented in March 2020. Funnily enough, it was presented 1 week before the entire world went on pause. We just made it in. So during design development, the project was shared twice here to the Active Transportation Committee. Our initial public process yielded 3 alternative design options, and through continued community feedback, we narrowed it down to the preferred alternative that you see before you. It features continuous and separated sidewalks and bike lanes, while also double tracking the MX where it currently experiences a pinch point due to bidirectional service having to use a single track. Adding the additional track where that pinch point occurs will enable LTD to increase service along its most frequently used route. Additionally, the design features a mix of roundabouts and signalized intersections, including a brand new intersection at 13th Avenue and Moss. Changes to the Franklin's design will update it to be a multimodal corridor. So in some sections of Franklin, there will be space for a one-way bikeway on either side of the street. But in other sections, it will be a multi-use path on one side of the street due to space constraints. And those constraints will also impact the size of certain elements of landscaping. So for instance, where there's more space, we can put in larger trees, and where there's less space, it'll be limited to smaller trees. And so that actually brings us to here, the present day, because while we are also currently working on releasing that final recommendation report for that design and working on the NEPA process, we are also applying for federal grant funding to help us construct the project. So last year, we at the City of Eugene, in partnership with the City of Springfield and Lane Transit District, applied for funding through the Better Utilizing Infrastructure to Leverage Development, also known as BUILD, federal grant. Combined with Springfield, the project extent is from Alder Street in the west to the McBay Highway in the east. And the BUILD grant selection criteria were safety, quality of life, economic competitiveness, state of good repair, sustainability, partnership, and innovation. But it looked at those criteria mostly through the lens of how transportation infrastructure could benefit economic development in terms of real estate development and moving freight and goods. And it also gave extra weight to projects that were located in opportunity zones, which are essentially census tracts that have met a designated set of criteria that labels them as being economically distressed. So the census tracts through which Franklin Boulevard travels through in both the cities of Eugene and Springfield qualified as opportunity zones, as well as both cities' downtowns, which anchor the project extent on either end. But now, under the new administration, the BUILD grant has been rebranded as the Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity Grant, also known as the RAISE grant. It's using the same selection criteria, but has revised the definitions of those criteria to focus more on how transportation infrastructure can benefit people and be a tool against climate change while still benefiting the economy. So because the scope of the entire project is beyond the amount of funding available, we are using our adopted plans and policies and their goals to prioritize how we construct the first phase of the corridor, should it be awarded funding. So this includes our Vision Zero policy to reduce the number of fatalities and life-changing incidents that occur on our roadways, injuries that occur on our roadways, our transportation system goal to increase the number of active transportation trips that occur, and our climate recovery ordinance to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So our application defines the first phase of construction in Eugene as including the facility improvements for people walking and biking, the second track of the MX, and 2 roundabouts, one at Walnut Street and one at the future intersection of 13th and Moss. And for Springfield and Glenwood, the funding would build upon work that's already been completed in Glenwood, extending road improvements west beyond the current intersection at the McBay Highway. It would extend the bike ped improvements west to Henderson Avenue, while also including construction of a new roundabout at Mississippi Avenue. So that brings us to the heart of the matter of why I'm here. We're asking you to please sign a letter of support indicating that the ATC is on board with this project and our grant application for the project. I believe that Lee provided you all with a copy of the draft letter of support with the meeting materials. And we did make the same ask of the ATC last year when we were applying for the BUILD grant, which the committee gave us that support for. And we're hoping that this year, even as now as the RAISE grant, it aligns even more closely with the vision and goals that we have for this project. And we are hoping that you agree with that. And I would also like to note that we do have a target date of submitting the application, including all letters of support, by June 28th. And so with that, are there any comments or questions? Should I call on people, or Grace or Daniel, will you facilitate?
Yes. Who had their hand up first? It was Josh or Alan or Andrew.
Josh.
Go for it.
So Zoom puts people in order of when they raise their hands. So that might be a little helpful. So my question is, you showed 2 roundabouts on the corridor as well as MX improvements elsewhere. Are the rest of the intersections in the corridor going to remain the signalized intersections as they are now?
Our application for the funding, due to the limited amount of funding available, we had to prioritize which roundabouts or like which improvements we would pursue. So those are the ones that we selected because of the occurrence of crashes and fatalities that have occurred there. We would ultimately like to construct the additional ones, but that would happen through later phases with additional funding.
I have questions about the roundabout. I know that at one time the city had consulted with some European designers about how to design roundabouts in such a way that they I think it was to prioritize bicycle and pedestrian traffic, but the designs that I've seen don't seem any different than what I've seen in other places. Can you tell us anything about that?
So I can say that we basically are not at complete engineering design just yet. If granted the funding, we would be able to also we would reach a final design for construction. And I can also note this and talk more closely with our engineers and with Larissa, who is the project manager on this project, and come back with a more definite answer for that.
Okay. There's a lot of discussion in the bicycle community at large about roundabouts and whether they really improve throughput, and I think they do improve safety, but whether they really promote active transportation or whether roundabouts are really designed for moving cars. And in our conversations that we've had about reaching our climate goals and reaching the TSP goals, I'm not convinced that this project, or with the roundabouts as a somewhat of a barrier to really promoting active transportation.
Go for it, Andrew.
Hey, Karen, thanks for the presentation. Really appreciate it. I guess I'll just say I share some of Alan's concerns about roundabouts, but my question is more about the bike facilities, because you said there's an opportunity to do some one-way on each side protected facilities, which is fantastic, because Franklin Boulevard is not a safe place to ride a bicycle right now, even in the bike lane after Walnut, I think it is, or wherever it is there. I was curious, I guess, because I can't really see, and I'm assuming if I can't, everyone can't, kind of how that works in the photograph here. Like, how does the switch over work? If you go from a two-way to the 2 one-ways, are we assuming we have to like cross at a roundabout and like go around to get on the other side? Or I guess I'm just curious, if there's constrained roadway space, I'm going to be the bike advocate here and say, why are bikes the one like dealing with that constraint? Why isn't someone else taking the hit on that constraint? Or why don't we work with like less, I know those street trees, they were an issue when LTD put in the original MX line, but also I know that they're not like a native species of oak. They're not particularly healthy trees either. So I'm just curious, like, what can we do about the space constraint? Because I would like to see Franklin be a really positive corridor to ride down. Or I'll say maybe it is, and I just don't understand. Can you tell me how the current designs conceptually move bikes to the corridor a little bit more?
So it would be I guess kind of just like how you said, with the one-way protected bike lanes on either side. And there would be at certain points where the bikes would have to cross over to the multi-use pathway.
Sue and then Steve.
Yeah, that surprises me. I had the impression that can you show the previous slide or the slide that shows the cross section of the street? Because I had the impression that it was just one of the sides, instead of being a separate bikeway, it was a shared pedestrian and bikeway, but that apparently is not true. Anyway, I was wondering what happens to the bikeway when you get to a roundabout, or do bikes merge into the traffic going around the roundabout? Because I think that works fine for experienced, confident cyclists. I'm not sure it works for less confident cyclists.
I can, speaking back to Andrew's point, I can say that all of the modes where we were talking about the space constraints, I'm sorry, Sue, I will address your question in 1 second, but all of the modes are actually going to be taking trade-offs, and that we will be reducing a travel lane in order to add the additional active modes of transportation. And Sue, can you please reiterate your question one more time, please?
So just to clarify, there will be a one-way bike lane on each side for a while, and then at some point on one side, you have to cross over the street to get to a two-way shared use path on the other side. So that's one question. And then the other one was what happens to the protected bikeway when you get to a roundabout? Do the bikes just merge into the roundabout? Because I have concerns about that for less confident cyclists.
It wouldn't merge into the roundabout. It would be essentially its own like additional lane around the periphery. So kind of like it would have to be kind of like making a two stop crossing at an intersection. Like if you're going to be turning left, essentially, you would just one way cross and then again, but it's just essentially going around.
Yeah, so I've used it a fair number of times as a commuting route to get from Springfield back to Eugene. And I will say, where you, as a commuter heading from Springfield to Eugene, the portion that uses the existing roundabout is really quite comfortable because you're not crossing the street. You're simply going around the traffic. As a cyclist, that's a very comfortable crossing. There's no need to stop. You're out of the traffic lanes. If you wanted to cross the street, that's a different issue. But I would also just add the point of emphasis to others' concerns that we should remember, of course, that the bike path, the bike path through Alton Baker Park is not really supposed to be used by scooters or e-bikes. So this becomes the most important commuting avenue for e-traffic back and forth from Eugene to Springfield. So I would just emphasize that for the designers as they think through the final design to make sure that that connection along that South Bank path is really well tied together for heavy commuting bike traffic.
Ellen?
Yeah, my understanding of the design is that the crossings are very similar to what we see in Glenwood on Franklin Boulevard, and in that case, automobiles have free-flowing traffic, and theoretically, pedestrians and bicyclists have the right of way at the crossings, but they're at right angles. And so it has to be, as a bicyclist, you often have to dismount. You have to take each segment one at a time. So it's, again, it is really favoring automobile transportation. There's just unequivocally, the roundabouts are designed for automobiles, not for bicycles or pedestrians. So I have some problems with that. since we're being asked as representatives of active transportation to support a proposal that really is not. Well, there are many attributes that improve what currently exists. It's really not ideal. So I'm ambivalent about this.
The bikes will be separated from the roundabout with their own travel lanes, and they will have their own travel lane on the outside. They will not have to merge or anything.
Right. It's the intersections that are the problems.
Yeah, Josh, before you go, I just wanted to reiterate that, that the pedestrian facilities at the roundabouts on Franklin are horrible for pedestrians. There's no way for a cautious pedestrian to get across the street at all when there's auto traffic flowing. Whereas the current conditions, cars are required to stop at certain intervals. So I'm really concerned about, pedestrians. I'm not, quite as concerned about cyclists compared to pedestrians who, may well be at much greater risk now than they are under current conditions. I think that there probably are ways of making roundabouts safer for pedestrians, but they involve dramatically slowing down cars. And so reducing the amount of throughput, and that's not what's happening at the Franklin roundabouts in Glenwood right now. So we have Josh and then Mary.
I'll bump down in the queue below people who haven't had a chance to speak yet.
Great. So Mary and then Josh.
Well, I guess I was just wondering where I know that Karen, you put up a timeline, but I still want to be reminded where we are in the process, because I think this is really important communication. You're asking us to sign a letter of support for funding. Is there still time to ask these important questions about the design process, or is that not where we even are right now?
So we are still, the design process that engineering process is not at 100% yet. There is still room for making tweaks there to accommodate everything. And the street is a very complex street. It widens, it shortens, it twists, it turns. It's a very complicated street. And really, we've looked at it every which way. And ultimately, the thing that keeps coming up is the only way to get everybody through safely and efficiently and sustainably is through using roundabouts.
Josh Mendez.
Yeah, I don't know if you mentioned this and I didn't hear it. Is there going to be a speed reduction along the road too as you cut it down to 2 lanes?
So one of the things about roundabouts is that they naturally slow cars down. Just the way that they're designed, you kind of have to you're mentally, you are inclined to slow down as you start to make your way through it. That's one of the things that makes them so much safer than an actual traditional signalized intersection. And it reduces the number of conflict points because the way that they're designed, where somebody driving might have a blind spot for somebody who is biking or somebody who is walking. So it reduces the number of ways that you could have those potential blind spots.
But I guess my question is there going to be an official reduction in speed from 35 to say 25?
We will also be reducing the posted speed of the street.
Okay. And then sort of the second question is, this weekend I had a chance to bike along North Garden Ave. I think it's Ave and Commons Drive, and there's a little roundabout there. And that's only a one-way street going each way, but cars are still flying out of that intersection right there. And so if you're crossing on a bike, and that's also a place where the bike sort of, I don't even know what it is. There's like a glorified sidewalk, but in any case, you can ride along there and sort of you have your own separate little space. But you got to be really careful to just see all these cars flying around there. So I'm just concerned that with the double capacity for motor vehicles, you know, these intersections are just going to be horrible for both pedestrians and bikes. I know this has already been said in the comments, but I'm just sort of adding my voice to these concerns.
So Karen, you said just now that the plan is to reduce the speed. I'm wondering if you know what the speed will be reduced to and what engineering decisions are going to make that speed tenable. Are people going to feel comfortable driving at a speed that is safe such that they're going to be interacting with pedestrians?
So again, circling back to the fact that we still have time and we will be working with engineers to continue refining the design for that, for the intersections. And we are actually going to be hiring that Dutch firm Mobicon to assist us with that. As for the actual posted speed, I am not 100% at this time. We will have to get ODOT approval though to lower the speed limit, but we are hoping to lower it to 30.
I believe we have Josh and then Andrew.
Yeah, I just want to remind folks that the corridor right now is absolutely terrible and there is no funding for making improvements. And so while this design may not be our preferred alternative on this committee, I think it's absolutely imperative that we get some funding in to do something, which this does represent. And I'd also appreciate, Karen, if you could remind us of some of the considerations that go into this corridor with regards to like freight and ODOT's requirements in terms of design and speed.
Yeah, so we are required to build it to accommodate, I'm not sure off the top of my head the exact length of it, but we are required to, because it is still a state highway, it has to accommodate a large freight truck vehicle. So we need that's a requirement that we also need to consider in addition to the people who are walking, biking, using transit, using assisted mobility devices. We want to get everybody through safely and sustainably, but you know, there's trade-offs for everybody. But yeah, there are those considerations that need to be taken into account as well.
There's lots of discussion going on in the chat. Now is a good time to voice anything to be added. Yes, Anne?
I'll just add, since I think this is in the chat, I think it'll just be interesting to see the design as it, you know, if funding comes through and the design starts getting more fleshed out. Because again, as I was poking around on Google Scholar, it just looks like the design does really matter in terms of bike and pedestrian implications. So it seems like some studies are finding that it's worse for bikes and pedestrians. Some studies find roundabouts are better, but it really does matter in the design. So I think we'll all look forward to hearing more. And it sounds like the city's also aware and concerned. So that's great.
Steve and Josh?
Well, with all that in mind, unless there's other discussion, I would like to make a motion that we unanimously support the letter that Karen has drafted in support of the funding that is so badly needed.
Second.
Okay, so all in favor, thumbs up. Those, if you would like to continue discussion, thumbs aside is a good way of doing that. And to block the decision for now would be a thumbs down. Okay, so we've got 2, 3 asides, 4 asides, and everyone else is up. Somebody with more experience than me, tell me how many asides we need to continue discussion.
3 asides is enough to block and require continued discussion.
Thank you, Josh. So we had 4 folks aside. Can we have any of them tell us what would get you to an agreement here? How could we change this? Andrea?
I guess my concern is that, I have some issues with the crossovers, and also, I mean, being in Bend where there's lots and lots of roundabouts, people actually drive more aggressively. So I think without sort of some assurances that there'll be some more thought about what the design is, and really assurance that it's going to be a lot more bike friendly. I just, it's a big project. It'll be undertaken, and then to have to redo it again, I think is like, that's another incredible thing to do. So it's good to do something well the first time, or as well as we can the first time.
And we will be working with that Dutch engineering company where they have plentiful experience in these designs.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, having it stated in the letter as public record that we have concerns about, or maybe not concerns, but that we want a design that emphasizes the ease of traffic flow for bicycles through intersections. Would make it a lot more palatable to me. I don't know what the exact wording would be to make it show that we still support the funding of the project, but that we want to ensure that this is noted and not just some promise that city staff want to be able to deliver, but maybe aren't able to later on if they don't have the funding or something else comes up.
So the letter provided is totally a draft and available for editing. And I am going to once again iterate that we are still at the concept level, and the grant would help pay for continued designing, and we will continue obviously to involve y'all in that as we move forward with that design refinement.
Sue, Andrew, Grace.
This is just an editing thing. The first sentence of the letter isn't even a sentence.
We can modify that.
I mean, because I was looking to see whether it says something to the effect of, that it will be made as safe as possible for bicycles and pedestrians, but it's, I'm not sure what it's meant to say, but it's not a sentence.
Andrew?
Well, I'm glad to see we're still on the topic. First of all, I just want to say thanks again, Karen, because I know we're being really critical. And I know that it's really hard sometimes to hear that feedback because we're like an interest group. So thank you. I just want to start with that. I was going to, I guess, comment if this helps anybody, because I work at LTD and I know how important double tracking that is, which is why LTD as an organization, not me speaking, I've been as an organization, LTD is really supportive of this because our buses get delayed a lot right there. And that's like the whole heart of the MX system. So even though this maybe doesn't make it perfect for people biking, it certainly makes it a lot better for people taking the bus. And that's many thousands of people a day, not just going to the university, but between Eugene and Springfield. And it also kind of echoes out into the rest of the system because when we get delayed there, MX is delayed. It costs LTD money, more money to run every year. So that's really positive. And I was also just going to note that I was personal friends with Andy Kading. I guess still am, but he's not here anymore. And I talked with him a lot about these roundabouts because I think, a lot of the concerns that a lot of people here have. And, one of the things that I took away from the conversation was not the technical detail that he understands that I probably never will, but just that I think since he was involved in those designs, I really trust him, and he assured me they're not going to look like the one in Springfield at McVeigh right now. Like there are some really subtle differences that I think are at least in the conceptual designs, and I'm no expert, I'm not an engineer, but I do trust Andy, and that's why I think personally I'm supportive. I don't mean that as a way to like convince anyone, but Andy really was someone who's concerned about bike safety, and he had cycled all over Europe, so he knows best practices. Unfortunately, we really lost a good employee at the city when Andy left, but I guess that's why I think, Alan, I like your suggestion of we support the funding, but let's keep pushing on the design.
A quick follow-up question, Andrew. Can you quantify the delay of buses in any way?
Yeah, that question's come up before. I tried. It kind of really depends. When things get off, they get really off. And actually, they're kind of well, I don't want to say unquantifiable. There are a bunch of costs that aren't just like a bus got delayed. So we like actually just build more time into schedules because we know that buses will get delayed. And that's part of kind of I call it like the business case for building MX on other corridors as well, is that every year it takes us a little bit more time to do your route, and that costs us a little bit more money, and it's like death by 1,000 cuts. But even on the MX system where it's single tracked, if anything gets off, then everything gets off. And we actually have to have someone who's like actively dispatching, which is essentially LTD's paying an employee sometimes just to try and get the MX buses to like hold and go perfectly. That wouldn't be an issue if we had 2 lanes through there. So it could be done. I don't think it's like it's not millions of dollars a year, but when it happens, it's pretty hard to get the buses back on time. And then they're not syncing up with the rest of the buses. So we're LTD's interested in doing it, very interested.
Grace?
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of good discussion and concerns here. I just have some thoughts to kind of synthesize what I've heard so far. Overall, I'm in support of this project because I do think it presents a lot of improvements to what we currently have. And I think there's a lot of room for further design. I'm wondering about the possibility of supporting the letter of support and maybe making some edits to that for those who are interested in it, and then having a separate, maybe a motion or separate write-up from this committee to the city to talk about things that we'd specifically like to see. I'm not sure if the funders are the appropriate people to tell our feedback in terms of criticisms of the project.
I saw Steve, then Papa.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Grace. And the other thing we should remember is where we are historically. This is historically a terrible, dangerous, very heavily traveled corridor. It's highway, a state highway. And where are we going to be in the next 5 years? There's a lot of work going to be going on in Glenwood, a whole lot of development, park and retail development. I'm not sure what that looks like, but there's going to have to be a lot of focus on what really happens on that corridor as it develops. I can tell you right now, I go on that street a lot, and there's not any good reason to cross over the street right now from one side to the other, but there will be in the future. So I think there has to be a lot of design work that's going to happen before anything gets built, and it's going to have to take into account an awful lot of dynamic change in the Glenwood district. So I would propose to amend I don't know if it's appropriate right now, but amend the motion that I made to say that we support the letter as edited to be grammatically correct, and with the understanding that there's a lot of design review to be done in the future that that this committee will be involved in. Otherwise, I think what we're saying is we don't want to ask for money because we're afraid we won't do a good job if we get it. I trust us that we can. So that's my suggested amendment.
Okay, I would like to hear from Papa because we haven't heard from him yet this evening. And then Steve, maybe you could reword that as a proposal.
Yeah, thanks. Karen, yeah, thanks for the presentation. I had a few questions on the roundabouts. Coming from English-speaking countries, are very used to using roundabouts, and I know the busier the street gets, it's really hard for cyclists, no matter what the design is. But taking that into consideration, what I noticed that signage really helps in terms of maneuvering your way around the roundabout, especially if it's got more than 2 lanes. I don't know how big these are going to be, but I've noticed, like I saw one roundabout in Hillsborough, which was really clear signage. I was able to go in there and realize exactly what lane I should come out, where I should go in. And also I noticed one in Springfield. So in terms of your signage, and what are you doing about that? And how many lanes will this be in terms of those roundabouts when you enter the roundabout?
So that's still a design consideration. And as for the signage, there is totally room for signage. Yeah, good wayfinding, clear signage, all very important elements.
Thank you.
So Josh, you made a really good suggestion. I think it sounds like 2 motions are in order. And I would, so I'll just put the original motion back on the table that this, subject to correcting any grammatical errors, the committee supports the letter unanimously to support funding for the corridor.
I'll second that.
Okay, again, all in favor, thumbs up. All opposed, thumbs down. Okay, I'm seeing all thumbs up. Fantastic. The motion is approved. So as a second motion, I would propose that we elect a subset of us to write a letter to city staff encouraging some changes and, maybe not changes, but kind of alterations in favor of design for pedestrian cyclist safety to be sent to the committee.
Sorry to interject, Daniel, just because I work on these kinds of projects. I'm wondering, Karen, I guess what I'm trying to express is, I don't know like what level of design and engineering you're at, but you said that you're not there yet. And I'm wondering how far along you are, and like how much room there is to make changes, and whether or not it would be appropriate for us to ask you to come back and work with us if you get the funding, because we don't do more design and engineering without funding. And I imagine you all don't have the time and money to have us nitpick things in your designs. You kind of have to submit the grant application as is, and then we'll come back and do the design. Am I correct in that? Would that be more productive?
So we're still at the concept level, and we would totally be continuing to work with you as the design continues to be refined. So yeah, and to further to your point, we are basically at 15% design. So there's a lot of room for refinement.
How are others feeling? Josh has a hand.
Yeah, well, I want to go ahead and second your motion and then add, I feel like 15% is a good time to express our concerns, even if we're not demanding particular design alterations at this point. But I think we can highlight some of the things that were said here tonight in sort of a more formal fashion so that staff has that to reference when they do start to get beyond 15.
Okay, Grace has a hand, but I feel like our rules are such that we have a second, so we should vote. Unless it's quick, Grace.
I was just going to make a friendly amendment to the motion that we make a motion that some of us write a memo or letter to city staff that includes our suggestions or our concerns, as well as a request to city staff that they bring the project back to us should funding be awarded.
Okay, so the full motion, as I understand it, is that a subset of us are going to write a letter to city staff indicating our desires for future design work to be done on the Franklin Boulevard corridor, and to continue to work with us as that process moves forward. Does that sound correct? Great. So all in favor, thumbs up, opposed, thumbs down. Great. Okay, I see all thumbs up. Okay, anything more to be said about this? Thank you so much, Karen. This was a lot more intense than I thought it would be.
Thank you all. Very much appreciate all your feedback and very happy to work with you all. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Okay, so we should decide. Okay, so that letter. Are you comfortable, Karen? Comfortable making minor grammatical edits in the spirit of the message?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're set there, and I am interested in writing the second letter. Is anyone else? Can we create a little ad hoc committee right now? Can I just get a real quick sound off? Who's interested in being a part of that? Alan, yes. Josh, fantastic. I'll write your names down and we can get connected later. So the next item on the agenda is Camas Ridge Elementary School Site Plan Update. So I believe this is Julie and Mary and Sue. Are you prepared to talk about this? Is there someone who is willing to lead this conversation?
Well, it's sort of, in a way, it's kind of a little bit of a duplicate item because we also have it in the subcommittee reports. So, it might be, we might be able to, I don't know how Sue and Mary feel about that, but it seems like we could have the whole discussion in the subcommittee reports, or the subcommittee report could be part of this discussion, either one.
So if I may, this feels like a good time to have a discussion where other ATC members can give their input, whereas the report is maybe a better time to just tell folks what we're doing and maybe not get into the weeds too much, because this feels like a pretty big, timely thing. Mary has a hand.
Well, I was just going to start the recap of where we are with others to join in, if that's okay. I'll go ahead. So there was a virtual open house through Camas Ridge with the architects end of May, and they kind of gave a little synopsis of where they were, and then we broke into small chat groups, and each chat room had an architect to speak with. And in our chat room, there were a lot of concerns about the size of the parking lot that came up a lot. And then when we checked with other chat groups through an email exchange, other chat groups also reported that there was a lot of concern and a lot of questions coming up around that. It's still in our group, and I imagine in others, it still felt like more of a one-way conversation, like we were expressing our concerns, but I didn't hear much back from them. So it's still not a two-way dialogue. It's more like they're supposedly logging our concerns, but we don't know where they go after that. And they're supposed to, I think, have a report out of everything that was said, but we haven't seen that yet. And I don't know where that stands. So there's a lot of unknowns in the process. Since that virtual open house, there was one letter from a neighbor in the Register Guard. There have been letters to the school board from various people. There have been a couple of comments at a school board meeting. There was a Camas PTO meeting with some of us attending to think about where we are and further error concerns and come up with next steps. Like I said, we're still not sure where it stands. The feedback has been very limited to non-existent. And so our next steps right now that we've come up with, and we're curious what other people have to add to this or any feedback, we are developing an online petition that just states very simply, this is what the subject is, and we think that that should be limited parking and limited drop off and pickup area. And we're asking people to sign that. And along with that request to sign the petition, we're also asking people to submit letters to the school board. We heard from Maya Rabasa, who's going to be on the school board, and she's had a lot of experience. She said a petition's great, but letters, flooding them with letters really matters. And so we're asking for both. And so we are now we're going to be working on collecting a list of active transportation advocates to send that out to. And so we're hoping that we'll send it to all of you, and we're hoping you can either send it out or give us addresses that you think should be added on. And then we also have a request in process. We haven't sent it out yet, but we're developing a letter that will go to 4J Facilities, the school board, the chairperson of the school board, the architects, and it's going to request an in-person meeting because we have said that because of COVID, it's been insufficient kind of exchange of ideas, and we would like to meet in person and with either a public meeting that's maybe facilitated, or else a sit-down meeting with various stakeholders. And so that's a formal request that we're sending to the sort of decision makers as we see it. And so we're curious to see if they will, say yes to the meeting or not. That will also be public record, however they respond. And then we also have some thoughts about further actions in terms of, there are RG reporters who might be interested in things like that. So that's where I see it stands right now. Please add on anyone or let's hear from people.
Yeah, I would just say that it's kind of frustrating because it's hard to know where the decision really lies. I mean, it ultimately lies with the school board, except that the school board seems like they're kind of disinclined to get involved. I mean, they've got lots on their plate, and it sounds like they don't usually get involved in the nitty-gritty of school design. They just let the facilities guys do it. And so I think the intent of the flood of letters is not even so much to persuade them to reduce the parking lot as much to engage in the issue. It's tricky to say. I mean, if the facilities people are making the decision, we don't have any input to the facilities people, so we have to go to the school board, but the school board seems kind of at this point not particularly engaged in the issue. And then it's also, we've been trying to figure out how to get the school board on board with the community goals around climate change and transportation. I mean, they are major shareholders in the climate action plan. But that doesn't seem to mean a whole lot, frankly.
There's, we've had quite a political education along the way, and it does appear that, as far as I can tell, that facilities, they believe that there is a policy, even though it is not written and not stated, to provide as much parking as code will allow. Hence the original parking lot being 25% above code, that being what code would allow. The architects, interestingly, reiterated that in my breakout group, when I really pushed the architect on it, he said, we're just doing what's in the code. And we have to do what's in the code. And when I said, well, the code allows for quite a variance plus a, a process to reduce it beyond the simple variance of 25% and 25% below, he seemed unaware of that process. There's also been a great deal of confusion on the part of the board, and even I think the facilities staff at 4J, the difference between Camas and Edison, because the process for Edison, which was no parking at all because of the huge constraints of that site, is a very different process and much more complicated than the process that we're pushing for, which is actually quite simple. So there's those things, but I think the thing that we found that there's the most frustrating is just that there are no teeth. There's no teeth anywhere in the transportation system plan or the climate action plan where something that is being built with community dollars, tax dollars, does not have to conform in any way to community goals and aspirations with regard to climate or transportation. And that is very, very frustrating to, I think, to many of us. And it has been brought up with the mayor. She's very aware of it. And it's just not, well, how do we, how does that get dealt with? It's not a simple solution. So that's what's kind of where we're at.
Josh?
Yeah, I'm sorry this is not going to be immediately helpful for this, but you made me think about it when you were talking about teeth. And there are some major land use changes coming up in Eugene. And at some point, they're going to talk about parking in that. And so I think it may be important to get involved in the conversation about what our parking maximum is and whether it should be a good deal lower than it is now. So just a thought for the future.
Yeah, so one of the things you were talking about, Julie, Sue, Mary, at our subcommittee meeting was the fact that, like, so City of Eugene has, Vision Zero policies, climate goals, but 4J is, fundamentally different and does not have any of those goals or policies. And so, in some ways we're, in some ways we may be putting the cart before the horse here, except that this thing has to happen now. Because, in spirit, they really should be, pursuing those same goals, but as you say, there's no policy to point to. But it sounds like many of the folks on the board are receptive to it. And the fellow that was that was originally responsible for that direction is terming out and being replaced by Maya Rabasa.
So I think there's a real opportunity for the ATC. I've had some conversation with the current board president, who of course will be changing over in just a few days, really, and there'll be a new 4J board president. Made the point with her that there are 33 schools and that generate hundreds and thousands of short trips. It is a real it's a real impact on climate change, because most trips to school are pretty short. They're not long, especially in elementary schools. So it is kind of the low-hanging fruit. And I think they are aware of this. And it's just that they're in the business of education. They haven't had a big, push for climate change. But I think there is some realization that really is a part of educating children for the future. And there is some desire. So it may not help Camas, but I think the pressure on the school board to really look at how they work with the city is well placed.
Sue, Mary?
I think, Mary, you had your hand up first.
Excuse me.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say that there is some concern on the school board that I heard, but I also hear a tendency to trivialize it. I re-listened to the last meeting somewhat because there are other, what they perceive as more pressing concerns. And while they're more immediate, so I think it's easy for common people who aren't advocates to lose the thread of why this is important, because I guess there's a roof that caved in Kelly Middle School or something like that. So they're focused on that. They're like, okay, a few parking lots or a roof that caved in. These kids don't even have a school to go to. And I can really see the pull to be focused there. Of course they have to, that's immediate. So I think sometimes it's easy for people who aren't as involved as we are to lose that, or to not quite really understand the full impact of the size of a parking lot and what that represents and what that encourages. So I just wanted to say that, yes, there's a little bit of people understanding, but I think there's a whole lot of not, kind of losing that that sense.
Sue?
Yeah, a couple of points. The first place, just to reiterate what Julie said, if this were just one school and a few parking spaces, it's like, why bother? But we really are hoping that this will sort of be a precedent setting thing that, okay, this is how we design facilities in the future, especially those funded with taxpayer dollars, is that we address climate issues up front. So that, because the school district does, generate an awful lot of trips. Secondly, I think it's frustrating that both the facilities people and the architects, they're all talking about what's required of them to do, and the city says the city can't require them to do all this stuff. It's sort of like, it's frustrating that you can't just have a conversation and say, you support acting on climate change, we support acting on climate change. No, you don't have to do this, but isn't it in your interest not to build parking spaces that you don't need? We can help you do that. This, the neighbor, it's what the neighbors want. It's what the parents you've heard from want. It's the right thing to do. So even if you don't have to do it, why don't you do it? And then, there was some other point, but it's not important anyway. I guess just the point that it should be such an easy thing because they don't have to change their design of the school at all. All they have to do is, instead of paving this entire block, just pave a quarter of it. It's not a big thing. So.
We have 2 minutes more on this topic. This is just an information share, but if there are any folks that would like a decision made, we should make that happen soon. Anne?
Yeah, thanks to Julie and Mary and others for bringing this. It's interesting and super frustrating, just like Sue said. I wonder also how much, if possible in future conversations, if something like a conversation about the opportunity cost could be persuasive. So there's data on how much it costs to build a single parking space. It's in the order of $20,000 to $30,000 a space. And especially the public who might not have a grasp on travel and that parking induces more car trips, if saying like, hey, instead of these 100 parking spaces, we could spend $2 million extra on our kids. That seems pretty persuasive. So I wonder if that could also be a tool for future conversations.
Our slogan is kids, not cars. So we are on that, but it would be good to include the information about the cost of a parking space. That's a really good idea.
Grace?
Yeah, I just have one thought, which is this conversation is really making me think about how important it is that the best option be the easiest option for folks and the option that they're just naturally going to go to. And it's just making me think about where the advocacy and what the levers are that would make those decisions happen. And here I'm thinking if we can put pressure on changing the code itself, that would force people, that would make the easiest option the option that we want. So just food for thought, and want to keep thinking about how best we can use our time as volunteers and advocates. Although I really appreciate all the work you're doing. And I think starting the conversation with the school board is great too. I know from working in local government myself, oftentimes it's easier to look to the next level of government or regulators and say they're making us do it, and to tell that story to the public than to say we're doing this because it's good or for whatever reason. It's a lot easier to say we're doing it because it's the option that we have to take.
It's an emergency. Okay, so barring anything else, let's move to the next topic. May is Bike Month recap with Cass.
Hello. So Sue had asked for a recap of May's Bike Month. And so I'm here today to give you a little bit of a sense of what we did this year for Bike Month and a bit of a sense of the event overall. So let me just share my screen with you here. Ooh. Okay. All right, so 2021, this year, of course, is a little bit of a different year. Just like last year, I think I mentioned this before about Bike Month. We're still in a pandemic year. So we did a lot of making things work. And this year, we were a little less surprised than we were last year and able to do quite a lot more. And I think that the constraints really inspired quite a bit of creativity. So first I want to just say that this event is a regional collaboration. It's not a Eugene event. The original collaborative partners were Springfield, the UO Bike Program, and the city of Eugene sort of coming together to collaborate. And that has grown over time, but those partners are still our sort of have been our primary partners in this work. And the collaborative planning group is right now, depending on who can come to a meeting, is a pool of about 30 people. So it is a very big collaborative group. And the thing about Bike Month is that anybody can host an event. And it's a great way to, share the joys of biking and really tap people in the community to share their love of biking with everybody else. And as a result, it's a big event. It's a big event with a lot of people, a lot of hands. And in fact, this coming year, there might be a conversation because there were so many cooks in the kitchen this year, maybe a conversation about having a smaller planning group and a larger planning group just to kind of keep things more organized. So just by way of overview, so we had 38 events this year. Here are some highlights. Of course, the Golden Gardens ride that you all hosted. There's the tune-up workshop that we had, mobility justice listening session, so many things. The webcast for the world-class biking city, excuse me, was fantastic. If you have not seen it, and Anne is in it, if you've not seen it, definitely check it out. We also had a lot of prizes and discounts that different groups were giving away. And so that was a lot of fun this year. Some interesting things like Helmet Hair Don't Care, a social media campaign done by a local salon. So that's kind of a cool thing about Bike Month, bringing out groups that you wouldn't, or businesses that maybe you wouldn't necessarily associate with Bike Month, but there we are. Helmet Hair Don't Care. So that was great. And they gave away prizes as well. So the event goals, which was something that was asked about. So on a regional level, it has never been established overarching goals. It is something that we put in the survey this year to ask people, is this something that you all as planning partners are interested in developing? And we're still getting the results of that back. But I think that that's a possible conversation that we could have. I know in the past that there has been some effort to try to get some of the hosts of rides to complete surveys. And we do that. We did it this year at the end as well, but there was kind of about Bike Month overall. We were asking the event hosts, but there was another type of survey in the past where individual hosts were asked to complete surveys about their the attendees of their event, to ask everybody questions like, how many of you are new cyclists? How, and to get a sense of who's coming to these events and just get more data. But that didn't work at all. And there were a lot of people who did not fill out those forms, and it wasn't wasn't conducive to actually getting good data. So I think that it's possible that following the feedback from this year, that the planning group could come together and think about goals some more. But regionally, we've got a lot of different groups involved, and sometimes they individually have their own goals. I mean, certainly with the city of Eugene, what we're wanting to do is to demonstrate to riders that they're valued. We want to welcome new riders into the fund, so that's really important. And events like these really uphold the cultural parts of biking. And, we don't have all the infrastructure that we want yet. And more of it is coming, as we all know. But in the meantime, events like these really spur the biking culture and give us a month to celebrate. So it's also really important to maintaining our bike-friendly community status with the league. So that's something that we really need to do in order to maintain that level of recognition. And this is just, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but this is on the league's website with the details of kind of, what it takes to become a gold level cycling community, of course, diamond and platinum. So, some of the pieces, like I said, include having a bike month celebration, having bike to work events, various things like that. And so May is Bike Month is a big piece of that pie. So overall, we had a really great year, and we're still gathering the feedback from everybody about how this year went for them. And so we'll know more in about a week or so. But that's all I have for you today. I welcome some questions.
Thank you, Cass. Seeing no questions, we can move to the next item.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Active Transportation Committee virtual meetings. Lee, this is you.
Great. So we've been meeting for over a year virtually, but at some point we may get direction based on state and federal guidance that we can have in-person meetings. And so, but maybe meeting virtually is preferred, or maybe we meet in person sometimes, but not every time. So I have heard some feedback from people in the public that they like to attend virtually. It's easier than going downtown at night and attend a meeting, but I'd like to get some feedback from the committee about if we're allowed to meet in person, how should we meet? There is an option also that we could still meet in person, but the public could attend virtually, like city council meetings and planning commissions, or even if somebody for some reason committee member can't come in to a meeting, they can meet virtually. We could work that out too. So I just like some feedback.
Josh.
Yeah, as much as I enjoy chat and engage in it quite a bit, I actually find this format pretty alienating. I've upgraded my Wi-Fi and stuff, and still I get a pretty good amount of lag in a lot of the meetings I'm in. So this is a format I've accepted, but I'm not in love with.
I think it was Sue, and then I'm not sure, Grace and Julie.
I would agree. I think for us, as to the greatest extent possible, being in person would be preferable. Because I've never even met some of you in person. And you know, I think having the remote option, certainly for people at home who want to tune in, that's great. And if some of us are out of town but have internet access, you know, being able to attend even when you're out of town would be a good option. But I mean, so I guess I'd like a hybrid.
Go ahead, Julie.
I really value the meeting in person. I just think face-to-face communication allows for, you know, a much greater depth and understanding than this sort of awkward format. But I really recognize that there are people who are more comfortable staying at home, or it's more convenient, or they'd have to ride a car to get to a meeting. And so having that option of the meetings being also virtual at the same time is really a good one. And I am part of another group that does that, and it has worked out really well for some of us to be present and other people to be able to be seen and see remotely. So that would be my preference.
Yeah, I second what has already been said for a hybrid model. I think there's great benefits to both, for both committee members and for the public. I think there's a lot of value to in-person, but I also think that it does add to the accessibility if we can have both options. And there are sometimes, now particularly, I'm so used to having back-to-back Zoom meetings where having to factor transportation back in is going to be a challenge as we transition. So I think having some flexibility, at least while we transition out of what we've been doing, would be very helpful.
Andrea?
Yes, I would agree. I think hybrid meetings are great. And yes, barring any future transporter technology, I think that this is, you know, good for some people that have really tight schedules. And I think it is more accessible for the public. I agree that meeting in person has a lot of value, but I like the idea of having some choice and flexibility.
Steve?
Yeah, I'm in violent agreement with everything that's been said. I've found that the in-person meetings that we've had at the rides, et cetera, has really enhanced my feeling about the committee dynamic. I can't tell you why. Even the fact that I saw Josh on the street the other day outside outside a meeting. Oh, I know who you are. It just changes everything. But I also think it's important that the subcommittees who think about this, maybe even more important, the subcommittees think about meeting in person whenever possible.
So yeah, having experience with this kind of thing on and off for years, the thing about having hybrid meetings where some people are present physically and some people are virtual, is that the meeting always ends up taking the form, the bulk of the meeting ends up happening either in person or virtually. And I find this more or less depends on where the facilitator is and where the bulk of the attendees are. So if you have like 2 people present physically, but then everyone else is virtual, the meeting ends up being entirely on the screen. Likewise, if you have just one person who's attending virtually, they're probably not going to be able to end up feeling present and valued. If we did do something hybrid, and I would support doing that, I would say that we should definitely have a role, maybe a co-facilitator, somebody who is in charge of keeping an eye on what's happening for folks who are remote. So I think the optimal scenario is definitely to have the members of the public be able to attend virtually. It makes it much more accessible for people with children, for people who have a difficult time traveling at a you know, in the evening. But so what I would say is that we should definitely do that. But bear in mind that people who are going to be virtual, if most of us are in person, are not going to be as present, just by necessity. One question, what kind of facility do we have in terms of meeting? I don't even remember what the room is called anymore. There's a large, I think there was a projector. What do we have in terms of being able to make those people more physically present in terms of like cameras and speakers and monitors?
I'm not sure what the technology is going to be. We used to meet in the atrium building in the slope room. That's where the planning commission works, and those meetings are broadcast. I think there's going to be a cost associated with that. So I'm not sure. I think we would probably want to check in on how we broadcast.
Yeah, I know it has broadcast capabilities, but I don't know if it has the sort of hybrid model capabilities that you guys are talking about currently. But if nothing else, I mean, well, committees all over the city are talking about this. So it's very possible that rooms like the slope room will have a change in their technological capabilities in the near future due to, you know, the adjustment that we're all going through. But for right now, Lee, I imagine your intention is just to assess what the desire is, and then we can come back potentially with what is possible. Is that?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Anybody else? That was good feedback. Thank you.
Sue? Your microphone off.
Lee, I was just wondering if the subcommittees do start meeting in person, where does that take place? Does that have to be in a public meeting place, or I mean, I know the Sustainability Commission was very rigid about their open meetings thing, and it had to be in a public place and announced ahead of time and stuff. Are we subject to that same stuff, or could we meet at somebody's house or something?
In the past, the bike ride example Steve brought up, sometimes they would meet at restaurants, and sometimes they wanted to meet in our office, and we did that.
So it can pretty much be wherever you decide to meet, is it?
Yeah, Cass, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that for the sake of community involvement and awareness of what the committee might be doing, it's different from council's committees like the Sustainability Commission, the Planning Commission, different board groups like that. They fall under a different set of rules. But because this is a departmental advisory committee where you're advising staff, there's more flexibility there for you all to, meet in different ways. But there is an impact to the community that might want to tune in if you are meeting in a home, for example.
I think it's helpful if the subcommittee does report, so what they did does get into the public record.
The subcommittees, to my knowledge, haven't been posted as public events in the newspaper or anywhere else. We don't put it out that those subcommittees are open to the public. So it's not that they're not, but there's no, there has been no encouragement to have the community. They've been a little more low key than that.
And at the departmental level, for a departmental advisory committee, you don't need to do a public notice for a subcommittee.
Anything else to say about this? Okay, so our next topic is subcommittee reports. Let's start with the communication subcommittee.
Sure. So I volunteered to do that, and I kind of get off easy because most of what we talked about, we just discussed as a whole committee around Camas Ridge and the issues there. So I won't go into that again. That was the bulk of our meeting. Dan mentioned that he's been doing some videography at the Climate Revolutions, talking to people about their transportation stories and kind of why they do what they do. And I believe he's going to continue to do that. There are a couple of suggestions on how to ask questions and get answers that will be great in video. And we talked about kind of like whether or not we want to have some way to do like advocacy alerts. So when things like the Camas Ridge project come up, but many other things too, that we might be interested in as advocates, but not necessarily as, taking a position as the ATC. How could we best achieve that? Google Groups is kind of hard to manage, and we don't want to make everybody sign up. And we talked about working with other groups to leverage their lists, but there are obviously some pros and cons with that. So we have some ATC communication subcommittee members looking into different solutions, and we're going to continue the conversation about how we can leverage our networks to mobilize people around issues we care about.
Thanks, Andrew. How about the infrastructure committee?
I can go ahead. Due to conflicts, we postpone until next month.
Easy. Programs. I forget who is going to talk about programs.
I am. So we did some check-ins at the beginning, and Dan asked how we were all doing. Steve brought up the concern about some issues on the bike paths, some recent incidents of violence that he wanted to bring our attention to as we're talking about the path etiquette issue. Shane also shared some information about the Center for Appropriate Transportation that has closed, and that they are trying to look at some other places to home that institution, maybe at the place at 5th and High where the old St. Vinny's was, something he talked about. Also about the bike infrastructure, about the Olympic trials is something that's been a big topic for them. And I'm going to the NCAA stuff, and I'm very excited to use the bike valet on Saturday. So I'm happy that that's a big piece of that. And also he was talking about the Free Bikes for Kids event and the fact that they feel overwhelmed in having volunteers. And I just volunteered a couple of days ago, and it seemed actually pretty full. It seemed like they have gotten a lot of volunteers, but I will post the link in the chat for people to volunteer if there's other spots and they have time, because it's a great event. They're going to give about, I don't know, nearly 400 bikes are going to be given away, and with helmets and lights and locks and everything. And we also reviewed Mary's document about our goals and aspirations for this next year. We did some minor edits, and we also think of it as a living document, but we also wanted to think about not just programs, things we want to do, but also thinking about policy issues that are important that we want to look at in the next year. We did a little debrief on the Bethel ride, and I think most people felt pretty happy with how it went. We don't know how effective it was in the end. I think that a lot of people felt that, it was effort, and maybe we didn't have nearly as many people, or that it didn't resonate as much as maybe, it's a lot of effort for what we're getting out of it, I guess is the point. But we are thinking about trying to figure out ways we might be able to partner other rides like that, you know, with other institutions or events that are coming up. And oh yeah, free bikes for kids. Oh, and then 2 issues that we want to take up for sure in the next, you know, in our next meetings are a walking school bus. You know, we sort of picked a few things that we want to tackle first. So the idea of a walking school bus, which I think is pretty exciting, to be able to, in tandem with the, you know, the conversation about Camus and parking lots, about finding ways to have safe ways for kids to get to school, in concert with safe routes to school, and also the path etiquette stuff. We definitely wanted to, start talking about that. I think that's kind of it. I think Daniel also was really interested in looking at the issue around a new spiritual home for the Center for Appropriate Transport. So that's it.
Thank you. Okay. Last we have information share and project updates. So if there's something you've been thinking about or working on or want to share with the group, now is the time. Steve?
Yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know that Climate Revolution's next group ride is this coming Sunday. So 2 o'clock at Monroe Park. If you want to get yourself on video and be one of the heroes of Daniel's storytelling video, show up on Monroe Park. And the theme for this ride is my favorite ride. So that's the story. I just wanted, on reflection on everything that was discussed about Camus and the school system, I just had a couple of thoughts I wanted to share. You know, one is don't despair or become too, don't despair. I'm not continued. Everybody should continue to communicate with the school board. I don't think this is a done issue yet. And not the school board is the client here. So they're the ones who are going to respond to the pressure, in my view. Secondly, it seems to me if we really want to make a long-term impact on vehicle miles traveled because of elementary schools in Eugene, we'd probably be good to look at the issue of school choice, which is probably where a huge number of miles come into play. It's an extremely controversial issue, but I don't know that we have good data around how many miles are traveled as a result of school choice, but it would be a great research project for somebody to try to get their arms around and quantify.
Go for it, Grace.
I don't remember if it's already been brought up, and I'm guessing it maybe has, but Lane County is looking at 30th Avenue and working on a project there. They just had some public engagement opportunities with an online open house that have passed, but here's the project page in the chat, and you can sign up for e-notifications, and you can see the timeline. They will be doing more public outreach, it looks like, later this year or next year over the winter. So just an update there.
Sue?
I guess just as we're trying to put together a Google group or something to reach out to advocates, do people in this group want to be on the list to get notified about this sort of stuff? Or I don't know if, can we?
Maybe what we can do is provide people a way to opt in.
Okay, can we, I don't know how we do that, but we'd like you all to opt in if you're willing. Can you just send one of us an email or something, or?
I think once we decide what platform we're going to use, we can send out the invitation to everyone here.
Okay.
Go for it, Alan.
Hey, first of all, I just wanted to give a little bit of clarity about the conversation about the Center for Appropriate Transport. There is discussion about using that space for active transportation enterprises. So it hopefully will not be lost. In case that was in case you had that concern or worry. And I'd be happy to talk with anyone about that separately to give you a little bit more context. The second thing is that the university is posting a position. It was a position that Kelsey Moore had, the bicycle coordinator with the outdoor program. So if you know of anyone who might be a good manager, coordinator of the bike program, look them up on the internet. And then finally, in past years, I've received notices from the Department of Transportation about Highway 242 and its snow plowing schedule. And they clarified that they're no longer doing that because it is not, they are trying to be clear that they are not clearing the road for bicycle and pedestrian use, that they are clearing it for all vehicle use when the gates are open, and that people who use it before that time are doing so at their own risk. So they will no longer be providing any announcements to people about the status of the road clearing, which I think is really unfortunate. And I think that it is at odds with efforts to trying to promote bicycling for tourism and economic development, but that's kind of a whole nother story. But I thought you all would want to know since it's a change in ODOT's policies.
Alan, I had a little question about CAT. I don't know if nobody else has any other comments. I've heard a number of proposals people have been putting out, or renaming the thing. I think I heard mice somewhere. Is it sort of still going to be a co-op sort of community bike shop, or sort of half and half like it was before?
I just want to jump in here to say that this is a conversation that's sort of ongoing and nothing is really settled yet. It's also in a more of a beginning stage. So I want to take care not to
okay.
Yeah.
This might not be the right
It's
forum
up in
for
the
that.
air.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood. My apologies.
No worries.
Julie?
Well, with regard to CAT, one of the things that's really lacking in that I've heard from many people, many ordinary folk who have bikes who don't fix their own, is that there's huge waits at bike stores to get simple jobs done because there aren't bike mechanics and there aren't people working on bikes. And I thought about how how promoting cycling in Eugene and creating a bicycling infrastructure, one of the most basic things you have to have is, people who know how to fix bikes. And I wondered if there was a possibility in a new bike center like CAT, whether there was an opportunity to partner with LCC to create an actual certificate program that would train kids, especially hands-on kids coming out of high school or in high school who are non-traditional learners. I had one of those, to be entry-level bike mechanics with a certificate. And I just think it's a big community need. It's a growth area. I've heard lots of bike store owners complain about not being able to hire people. And it just seems like there's an opportunity there that would fill more than one, that would fill more than one need. So that's just a, wild harebrained idea from me.
There was a request to hear from Bryce about what's going on in Springfield. If you're available, Bryce. or anybody else.
Hey, hello, are you there?
Yep.
Ah, hello. Can everybody hear me okay? Let's see. Hold on.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Okay, sorry, nothing very exciting to report as far as BPEC. We were just kind of talking about subcommittees, that kind of thing. Nothing terribly relevant to the greater area or you guys or anything. I may want to talk to you folks about e-bikes. Just kind of, I know that a lot of groups and communities and whatnot are discussing you know, the various laws and how to deal with e-bikes. So I may actually talk to Steve and see what you guys have on that. But from our end, not a whole lot going on. Thanks.
Thanks, Bryce. Grace?
Yeah, just to respond to Julie's idea, and there's more comments in the chat about it as well, but I know Lane Workforce Partnership is also a really great resource, and there's a lot of workforce shortages right now across the board. And I think particularly looking for ways to engage youth is something that is a high priority area for folks that are working in this realm. So if anyone wants to follow up about that idea, let me know and I can get you in touch with them as well.
Yeah, I have an e-bike with a funky computer. I need some help. Seeing nothing else, I think we can adjourn. Thanks everybody for coming out. See you next month.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.